Recording in progress.
Here we go. Good morning, and we wish you a happy spring. Good morning, and we wish you a happy spring. Spring is sprung. Joy. Lo, the earth awakes again. Alleluia. From the winter's bond and pain. Alleluia. Bring we leaf and flower and spray. Alleluia. To adorn this happy day. Alleluia. Once again the word comes true. Alleluia. All the earth shall be made new. Alleluia. Now the dark, cold days are o'er. Alleluia. Spring and gladness are before. Alleluia. Change then mourning into praise. Alleluia. And for dirges anthems raise. Alleluia. How our spirits soar and sing. Alleluia. How our hearts leap with the spring. Alleluia. Oh yeah, springtime. I can't put the mic down. We used to sing that every Easter for 17 years with different, much more spiritual lyrics at Old North Church, where I sang for all those years as a paid professional classical singer. But here I am, and we have more lyrics about the spring than Christ. So there. But if you believe in Christ, that's fine too, and we welcome you. I want to point out these Easter lilies that I bought at Star Market this morning. I wasn't going to buy them because I sort of have an issue with cut flowers, but I noticed them and I went and looked at the label and it says Ecoflora, which happens to be a farm in Costa Rica right next to my mother's farm. And the owner of this cut flower trade, who owns many acres on that mountain in Costa Rica where I grew up and where we lived, actually bought my mother's farm. And so these might even come from that farm. It's quite a coincidence that that's it. But he is in the special trade of Easter lilies. He's a Dutch guy. And so it's an amazing thing. Here is a symbol of Easter, grown in the tropics and flown here by, I'm sure, 24-hour courier, so they'd be fresh in the Star Market and probably also grown with lots of chemicals. And I won't go anymore. I'll just enjoy these Easter lilies that maybe come from my mother's farm. Welcome to Community Church of Boston, where we celebrate the spring and we celebrate all kinds of great things that have happened recently, events that you can find on our YouTube channel. The really remarkable one recently was an online event last Friday featuring Chaz Freeman, Ambassador Chaz Freeman, who was ambassador, among other countries, Saudi Arabia, and several others, China, ambassador to China, and a serious Sinophile and expert on China, and really had an amazing message to deliver to us. Chaz Freeman, And you can find that on our YouTube channel. Another one that just happened that didn't really happen is Philip Turney, who was the director of the USS Liberty Alumni Association, that ship that Israel shot down in 1967, or destroyed, not shot down, destroyed and almost sank, and killed 30 young sailors and wounded 100 more. And there's still not been an investigation about it. Unfortunately, we had Phil speaking to us. We lost his audio in mid-presentation, and we apologize for that. We don't think it was on our end, but we are doing that over on April 30th. It's a Wednesday, and we're doing it just completely online, but we really want to hear Phil's entire presentation, so we're scheduling it over again. Watch on our website and Facebook page for all the instructions and the link to the Zoom, or you can watch it on YouTube as well. We have two more events on our present newsletter. April 27th. Kind of connected to this program is Derek Jackson, the columnist from Boston Globe, retired now, on sports and also on race. Derek's new obsession, however, is about neither of those. It's about puffins. And puffins are on the coast of Maine. And it just so happens that our speaker today is from the coast of Maine, and we'll be hearing hopefully a lot about that, because it so happens we have a connection with the coast of Maine right here in our audience, and I'm looking forward to that conversation as well. So that's next Sunday. It's the talk is called Project Puffin by Derek Jackson. The Sunday after that, we're really looking forward to, we have Jill Stein and Miko Peled. Jill Stein, of course, the presidential candidate for Green Rainbow Party on several occasions, and several other things she ran for over the years. Dr. Jill Stein, and Miko Peled, who is the son of a important general in the 1967 war. Miko, who was born in Israel and is a Israeli and now a U.S. citizen, and serious, important critic of Zionism. We've had Miko a number of times here, and it will be a conversation between the two of them, and it's called Palestine and Washington, D.C., The Politics of Genocide. So that will, oh, we have one more to tell you about. It's an online presentation in the middle of the day. It's Saturday, April 26th. Sami Al-Aryan joins us from Turkey. Sami Al-Aryan, a victim of the U.S. war on terror of the early 2000s, convicted of terrorism for basically his opinions, and it's quite a story to hear. And Sami has spoken a number of times here as well. Also received our Sakwan Vanzetti Award in 2023, along with 2022, along with the Holy Land Foundation 5. Victims of the War on Terror was the topic for that year. So enough for announcements. On the subject of Easter, we always put this out on our sidewalk sandwich board, and it's a different take on Easter. This is, of course, the Pietà, which we show you. Our remarkable friend Katie Miranda, who is mostly a jewelry artist. She does Arabic calligraphy on silver, beautiful earrings and necklaces and bracelets. But she's also a painter, and this painting is the Pietà with Mary taking Jesus off the cross, and Mary has a hijab, and Jesus is wearing a keffiyeh. And I've just been blown away by this image for about the 5 years since we obtained it from Katie herself. when she spoke. This is the Pietà according to what is going on right now in Israel-Palestine. A reading from Eduardo Galeano, Children of the Days, for April 20th. If you haven't been here before, you will know that we read these quite a bit. I haven't even read this morning, but I just have to turn. There's Children of the Days by Eduardo Galeano. There's a submission for every day of the year. April 20th is called Manufacturing Mistakes. It was among the largest military expeditions ever launched in the history of the Caribbean, and it was the greatest blunder. The dispossessed and evicted owners of Cuba declared from Miami that they were ready to die fighting for devolution against revolution. The U.S. government believed them, and their intelligence services once again proved themselves unworthy of the name. On April 20th, 1961, 3 days after disembarking at the Bay of Pigs, armed to the teeth and backed by warships and planes, these courageous heroes surrendered. Bay of Pigs, April 20th, 1961. So I'm going to transition over to the guitar stand here, and just tell you that I'm doing the music today because I feel a deep personal connection with our speaker, who lived with us for 2 years while he was studying at MIT at the Sloan School of Management. And I want to sing a song written by Jay Mankiewicz that's called Pledge Allegiance to the Earth for this both Easter and Earth Day. As I have come to know this world from the moment of my birth until the day my life is done, I'll pledge allegiance to the earth. I'll pledge allegiance to the earth. From this earth we have grown, planet, body, Gaia, home. Learning to make peace with ourselves, realize we're not alone. As I have come to know this world from the moment of my birth until the day my life is done, I'll pledge allegiance to the earth. I'll pledge allegiance to the earth. We are all made of dust, and we'll all return someday. All of our weapons and our power, not so hard to wash away. As I have come to know this world from the moment of my birth until the day my life is done, I'll pledge allegiance to the earth. As we live, so live all. Flags and countries rise and fall. In the rhythm of this world, I can hear my own heart call. As I have come to know this world, from the moment of my birth until the day my life is done, I'll pledge allegiance to the earth. I'll pledge allegiance to the earth. I'll pledge allegiance to the earth. Thank you, friends, here gathered, as well as friends online in the cyber universe. We're here to think about people, planet, and power, and we're here to think about the future of humanity and civilization. We're thinking about little things that each one of us can do to save the planet and keep it from just going downhill the way it is. And that's why we thought it would be a great moment to hear from Tristan. Tristan Jackson, the first time I saw him, he was up in a treehouse, way high up, and we walked in, and he came down from the treehouse. It was on a place called Greens Island, where he grew up, and his family lived, and where he was homeschooled, and he grew up around boats and around seriously off the grid living. Really amazing childhood, and we went to visit when his girlfriend was living with us, fresh out of high school, for a year, and would commute up from Boston to Vinyl Haven and then to Greens, and we went up to visit, and we saw his pet crow, and we saw their humanure operation. And it was just a wonderful, eye-opening, a beautiful moment to meet the Jacksons and to start a lifelong friendship with a remarkable young guy and a remarkable family. Tristan came to live with us for 2 years while he was going to MIT Sloan School. And from there has had several different positions, and the most recent one is the most interesting one to me, and I'm sure he'll talk to you about it. It is as an advisor to the First Nations of the maritime province of New Brunswick on their resource and energy challenges, would you say? But he comes to it with just this incredible knowledge and wisdom about not only management, but about systems and about sustainability and planet and people. Tristan, thank you for being with us. Take it away for as long as you want.
Thank you, Dean. And thank you, everyone at Boston Community Church, for having me here. I'm sure I'm the least in the long lineup of illustrious speakers who have been able to talk with this congregation and in this space over the many years that it has been serving its community. So thank you for having me, and thank you, Dean, for the invite and the introduction. I'm going to see if I can get a set of slides to work with us here. And I have not done this presentation as an online slideshow before. So are you seeing a cover slide, People, Planet, People, Power, Planet?
Yes.
And if I do
And
this, does it advance to a blank screen?
yes, just in the corner, can we make that full screen, Amar? Or you have to make it full screen without the whole PowerPoint selection on the bottom. There we go.
Okay, well, that's not quite what I was going for because now it will, I'll see what you see at the same time. I was hoping to get a half-click preview before, because as I said, I haven't done this one on video before. I've been in the room to do parts of this presentation. And before I start, though, I'll tell a little bit more about what is this, why did I put this set of slides together in the first place, and what is the work I do, and why did Dean think to invite me here? So as he mentioned, I had been advising 7 First Nations tribes in Atlantic Canada, province of New Brunswick. That has evolved a little bit. I'm now the CEO of their sovereign wealth fund, which is called Niquitic LP. Niquitic's a Mi'kmaq word meaning growing together. And we set up the fund to invest in clean energy projects and joint ventures with companies to create economic sovereignty for the First Nations. I was working on a set of slides to present to the chiefs and some members of the band councils of those communities about a year ago when I was visiting Dean and Jennifer. And Dean peeked over my shoulder and said, what's this, what's that? We got into talking about it. And Dean may have mentioned in other conversations about me, we have a lot of philosophical and ideological alignment, but we do have a difference of opinion on the subject of nuclear energy. And we got into talking about why do I see it the way I do. And Dean said, it'd be great if you could come and share some of this information, not intended to convince anybody of anything, but just to share a point of view and help people to understand where I'm coming from on the subject, and maybe just stimulate some conversation about where we are as a humanity, as a planet, as society, and what are the big and small things that are being done and that we might be able to do about it. That's a bit of background on how we got to this presentation. A little more on myself. As Dean mentioned, I grew up on a small off-grid island. Before that, I first learned to walk at sea. I was aboard sailboats the first 2 years of my life, and this one is the Free, a Greenpeace ship. I'm the one on the right there. My brother is in the middle with the No Nukes t-shirt. And the first time I went to Canada was aboard that boat. We sailed up the Atlantic coast through the St. Lawrence Seaway, and we were protesting polluting the lakes. Chemical companies and the nuclear industry was dumping waste into the lakes, and we, of course, didn't want that to happen. So my family, my 2 parents, my brother and I were crew members aboard the Free, and that was how I first got to Canada, and my first work, if you could consider it that, on sustainability and environmental responsibility. More recently, in the last couple of years, I've spent the last 2 summers following the powwow trail through New Brunswick, visiting the First Nations communities there, and getting to know some of the elders around the sacred fire at the powwows, understanding some of their traditions, learning to make dream catchers. And I've been very honored and excited to be able to work with them on their investment strategy and to build economic sovereignty for 7 Mi'kmaq First Nations in New Brunswick. Over the last 10 years, slides have stopped advancing. I've been, other than that, on stages large with comfy chairs like this one in Dubai, and small with uncomfortable chairs in settings all over the world, speaking about energy projects, ones that I was working on and ones that people had asked about, their options. And in some cases, explaining why I thought we needed to be doing the kind of work that I was doing. And in this slide from some years ago, there's a slide in the presentation that I'm giving there, which if we zoom in is this one. And that comes from the famous Limits to Growth study that was published in 1972. So if we look a little more closely at it, what those lines are showing are the dynamics or the interrelated movement between different parts of the global system. And the original graph looked like this, the one that was published in 1972. The one on the left here that I had up in that other presentation is showing what has happened since this original one came out. So there's a sort of gray bar here that shows the period from 1970, 1972, when it was published, 30 years from then forward up to year 2000. And what we can see is the dotted lines are what was predicted, and the heavy dark lines are what actually happened. So it's not an exact match to the curve, but in terms of human predictions of things that might unfold, the Limits to Growth study has been, if not certainly among the most accurate set of predictions ever made by any field of study, science, philosophy, religion, you name it. The accuracy of what was anticipated, what was modeled and expected to happen, has beaten just about every other set of predictions that people have made. And what it shows is that we would grow the population, we would grow our industrial output, we would increase the food production per capita, we would draw down natural resources, and things would appear to be going pretty well for quite a while. But then we would hit these tipping points where suddenly population growth, the carrying capacity of the planet, our ability to produce new food on the lands we were cultivating would go through a sudden change. And we would have a dramatic reversal of the good fortunes we had built up. Population would go into steep decline, pollution would shoot up, and natural resources would run down. So if the predictions when they were made in 1970 tracked so truly for now, it's been more than 50 years since then, and they still are on track. There was an update to this was done just a few years ago and showed that we remain exactly on the track that was projected by the authors of the study. Suggests that we have some interesting times ahead, and that we may be seeing some of the repercussions that will be the more or less, I don't want to say inevitable, but highly probable outcome of our patterns of behavior as a species on planet with finite resources and finite space. So this has concerned me for some time, and this study, Limits to Growth, was published at MIT, and that's the reason that now about 15 years ago, I decided to go to study in the department that this study came out of, the System Dynamics department at MIT, and see what I could learn about it and see what might be done about it, if anything. So in the description of this presentation, I mentioned that the Earth and the people, the systems that we use and the natural ones around us are together one dynamic system. And that means that there are interrelations between the parts and that they move. And a change in one creates changes in the others. And in dynamic systems, there are feedback loops. So I'm going to talk about here 7 macro trends that are interrelated, and hopefully help again to explain why, from the no nukes barefoot kid on the Greenpeace boat, I've come around to actually favoring nuclear energy. And whether you agree with that or not, at least to share some of why the challenges that we're experiencing are so difficult, and some of the relationships between them. I want to emphasize that this is just one perspective. I don't intend to claim ownership of the truth by any stretch. This image, I think, gives a partial demonstration of how looking at something from one angle, you can see a reality that is true, and looking from another angle, you can see another reality that is equally true. Um, but that neither perspective, if you're looking at what's projected out kind of onto the wall of our experience, none of us hold the truth itself. And I think that's very important, as in these days, we have a lot of very strong opinions and people are quite attached to them. And I, above all, regardless of anything technological or system dynamics related, I want to avoid falling into the trap of polarized positions and positional arguing. So just bear in mind, I'm sharing a view that I have developed over some time, spent in the energy sector through study and through work. But that doesn't invalidate any other view that you may hold or that you may be aware of necessarily. Starting with climate, which is, I think, one that people are most aware of. These slides, as I mentioned, I started putting this deck together a year ago, and this was what was in the news then. Temperatures far above seasonal and the warmest year on record, warmest month, the world not prepared. I didn't bother to update because the same thing is equally true. At the time, a year ago, we were looking at rise in the ocean heat. Why is ocean heat significant? About 90% of the thermal energy that has accumulated in the biosphere since the beginning of industrial times is believed to have ended up in the ocean. The ocean has acted as a massive stabilizing heat sink, without which the surface temperature would already be unlivable. But all that thermal energy going into the ocean will eventually saturate. And you can think of that in a way, thermal energy, or it's the same as when you charge your phone. It goes faster at first and then slower at the end because it runs out of places to go. And the analogy is that the thermal energy or the electrons charging your battery are like cars going into a parking lot. And at first, they go in quite easily, and there's plenty of places for them to go. They don't have to look around for a place. But as it fills up, it starts to get crowded. And at a certain point, no more will fit. And practical experience that you can relate to on this is what happens if you have a pan of water on the stove and you forget about it. And as long as there's water in it, it's stabilizing. The phase change from liquid to gas of the water is drawing, it's an endothermic process, so it's drawing thermal energy out of the pan that's being, thermal energy is being added to the underside of the pan by the stove. But the phase change is keeping the temperature of the pan steady at 212 degrees Fahrenheit or 100 degrees Celsius until it's gone. And at the point that the water is not there anymore, all of a sudden that stabilizing effect also goes away and the temperature of the pan suddenly increases dramatically. So when I'm looking at temperature trends around the world, the ocean heat record is one that I'm most concerned with, and that is an indicator of what's likely to quickly follow. So this is showing a few years, the previous record of 2016, and then 2020, 2022, and 2023 jumping above the 2016 record and sort of taking off in a new direction. This slide I did update because I thought, well, maybe that was an outlier, but unfortunately not. The trend not only continued through 2023, but has now gone way above in 2024, and to today, it's still doing this. A little bouncing around, but on the whole, the ocean temperature is above where it's been for the last 45 years, which is what all the rest of those gray lines are indicating is the range that it was in since 1979. And yeah, so this is ocean temperature data from 79 to 24. We have heard politicians talk about the goal of staying under 1.5 degrees Celsius. And that is thought to, keep us in a fairly livable zone. If the science says if we go to 2 degrees, we'll have twice as much average drought and 50% more area burned in wildfires. Farm yields will fall rapidly. Infrastructure adaptation will become harder, and virtually all coral reefs will be lost. But if you look out to 3 degrees C, then again, we get dramatically more effects. 10 months of average drought, almost 100% more area burned in wildfires, local fish species going extinct, near complete melting of Greenland ice sheet, which will increase sea levels by about 21 feet, and marine ecosystems may collapse. The issue is, I've never believed the 1.5 degrees C target was even remotely realistic. And if you look at that same data set, the trend of temperatures, it's on this upward angle that I'm not aware of anything showing any signs of it coming down. And we'll talk a little more about that. But we've already hit days over 2 degrees C, not a whole year that has averaged more than 2 degrees C above the pre-industrial average. But it seems to be heading that way, and I'm not seeing anything that will change that. And that's including if we were to suddenly stop burning all fossil fuels today, which is not going to happen. We'll talk again a little more on why the trend is likely to continue. One of the features of dynamic systems, along with feedback loops, is that there are time delays between one thing happening and the effect of it, which make them tricky for us on our human size and time scale to see when we're talking about a system as big as the Earth. But the changes that we make and have made are having sort of discontinuous and in that sense shocking effects, but very predictable. Again, predicted pretty clearly quite some time ago. The climate warming and the flooding, you are likely already seeing this around Boston, I'm sure, if you've driven anywhere near the waterfront. It's not just because of the ice melting. That's an important thing to keep in mind. We are seeing sea level rise because ice is melting, ice that has been on land. But warm water also expands, and this flooding is not because we've added more water to the ocean by melting ice. It's just because the water is taking up more space because it's warmer than it ever has been before at different times of the year. In particular, in the fall, when tropical storms come pushing up the Atlantic coast, they're pushing with greater force and they're pushing warmer water. And that's going over parking lots, over roads, and into places that we've never seen it before. The ice melting is also accelerating, and that is again like the analogy of the water in the teapot. Ice, when you phase change from the solid form of water to the liquid, does the same thing that water does when you phase change from liquid to gas. It creates a stabilizing effect because it's an endothermic process. And the ice sheets are having the same kind of effect in the atmosphere as having a large block of ice in the middle of a hot room would do in the summer. It will cool the space around it until it's not there anymore. And so the effect of the melting ice sheets, again, in the dynamic system, is not just adding water to the ocean. And in fact, we don't know exactly what may happen if the ice is no longer there, or when the ice is no longer there. But again, the amount of stabilizing that it's providing, I think, is generally outside of public awareness and something most people don't think much about. to the wickedness of the problems, the wicked being complex and hard to change. We're doing this, we're heating the world because without heating, we still would not survive. And that's been true for as long as people have lived in cold places. They've had to do something to survive the winter. And if we were to stop using energy today, we wouldn't survive a winter in Boston or where I am in Canada. About a third of our fossil energy use goes to heating. And we talk a lot about other things like electric cars or the climate goals set by politicians. But we don't have any great solution to heating spaces without the use of fossil energy. There are electric heating systems, but there's so much installed infrastructure, installed base. I'll not get too far into the weeds of why it's so hard to replace. I'll just bookmark it as it is. And we've done it because even today, if we don't heat our living space, we can't survive. Again, for much of the world's population, not everyone, but we're seeing in Europe, for instance, and in other parts of the world, perhaps a bit more so, but in Europe, heat killed 20,000 people in a year in the past, say, like 5 years. I think this is 2020 data. So each year, heat is killing about 20,000 people, but cold is still killing about 10 times that many. So while the heating of the planet is a serious issue, you can bet that it's a more immediate and in some ways equally serious issue to not burn fossil fuels. And the things that we're doing today are not just the result of, say, a conspiracy of the fossil industry to cause havoc and make lots of money. They may do many things that are, business practices that are intended to create profits for themselves while ignoring problems that they create for others. But the reason that we burn fossil fuels, and there's some more information on this to come, is that without them, we couldn't live the lives that we live. And we have created the problems of today by addressing problems in the past. We've known about the impact of fossil energy on the climate for a very long time. This news came out about 113 years ago, when at the time we were burning 2 billion tons of coal a year. Today, we're burning 4 times that much. And then we're burning oil and gas, so emitting about 6 times as much CO2, which is around 4 billion tons a year. 40 billion tons is quite a lot. And as a gas in the atmosphere, it's a bit commonsensical to understand that if, say, you were in a garage with your car running, that wouldn't last very long. And the amount of air that we have to put this much material into is not as much as it looks like. If we look at the sky, it looks quite large. But if the world were the size of a normal classroom globe, the atmosphere on it would be about as thick as one coat of varnish. So not very much. And we drive all the time, 15, 20 miles, we think nothing of it. It takes 20 or 30 minutes, depending on which road we're on. But if you drove that far directly up, in about half that distance, you would be out of air to breathe. So the sky looks big, but it's not as big as it may appear. And the amount of material that we're adding to it has been known for a long time to cause changes. If we put all the oil and gas and coal together into oil equivalent units, we're burning about 100 billion barrels of oil a year. And it's just quite a substantial number that is hard to get a grasp on and hard to picture what could replace it. A bigger problem even than that we have done it and are still doing it, is that if we were to stop today, it wouldn't solve the issue. And that is back to the dynamic system having feedback loops. As things get hotter, things catch fire more easily. The woods, the forests dry out, and there are also more storms with lightning. And in Canada, which has the third most forest of any nation, a fifth of the area that has burned in wildfires in the past 40 years burned in 2023. And so it's an accelerating, maybe a little bit cyclical, maybe that there was some dead growth that built up and a lot of it has burnt recently. There's still a lot more to burn than has burned yet. And when it does, it's also emitting, in the case of 2023, there were 480 million tons of carbon. So relative to the 40 billion tons of CO2 emitted by burning fossil fuels, that's not that much. That's in terms of carbon. To get to the weight of carbon dioxide, you have to multiply by 3.67. So that's 1.7 billion tons of CO2. And it's getting up there, almost approaching 2% of the amount of CO2 that was emitted by burning fossil fuels, and about a quarter of the CO2 from all wildfires in 2023 came from Canada. This is one of the issues that we look at as the First Nations see their traditional role as stewards of the land and all of the land, not just the land they live on, but the world, and thinking about what are we going to do with all of the millions and millions of hectares of trees that are increasingly catching fire. And again, it's that feedback loop issue. The hotter weather causes it to happen. It happening causes hotter weather. And we really need the trees to be healthy for their ability to sequester carbon and provide oxygen. And they also cool as they do that. Photosynthesis is a cooling process. So we have this this dynamic system we live in out of its normal bound. We're in a fairly stable state for a very long time. Not forever. Notably, the Earth has cycled in and out of more extremely cold and more extremely hot periods over tens of thousands of years forever. But we have not seen, we have no record of such a rapid change in the conditions on the planet. And we also have never seen it before where we believe that a species is causing it. Now, we believe that. Some people don't believe that, of course. Whether or not we think that humans are responsible, we certainly can agree that we're out of the bounds that we've come to live within and come to depend on. So even if one thinks that we didn't cause it by burning fossil fuels, it's still a situation that we need to adapt to. So there's mitigation of climate change means emitting less carbon. Adaptation means either way, we need to build new systems and to think a bit differently about how we're going to hopefully survive and thrive in a century that's going to look a lot different toward the end of it than it did at the beginning. Personally, I do believe that the fossil emissions are causing planet heating. And I believe that we have two paths here. One, we can continue to do what we're doing. Our human activity doesn't just emit carbon, it also degrades the biosphere in other ways, land use change. And what's shown here in this picture is that we'll hit a threshold of a sort and tip beyond that into a point of no return. And this is what is also shown in the limits to growth study. and then we're in a situation where the Earth becomes very, very difficult to inhabit. I don't personally believe that the planet will go away. You know, we use terms like save the Earth. I don't think the Earth itself so much needs saving. I think it's humanity that is going to have a really hard time, and a lot of other species along with us, life on Earth. And I also don't believe it's likely that we'll end up completely devoid of life, like in a state like Mars. Um, but I think we may well, if we don't change dramatically the things that we are doing now, then I believe we're likely to end up in a very, very difficult planet with a very small percentage of the current numbers and diversity of life able to survive, and that in much less pleasant conditions. The other option is that our activity changes from degradation to restoration. That's a big step, actually. It's not so easy as saying it by any means, but if we are to do that, we could move back toward a stabilized Earth and a prosperous future. That's the main hope that I'm working on. That I'm my guiding principle is that we can have human activity that um, one supports a good quality of life. That's key. Humans are not going to opt in for it if it doesn't provide a decent quality of life, but at the same time works more in balance with a stabilized Earth system, so that we're not undermining our future prosperity by over consuming today, or by just consuming and building things that are ultimately self-defeating. We are seeing greater and greater impacts. This also is probably not a surprise to anyone because you do see it in the news, but we are, our number of more than $1 billion weather-related disasters has gone up exponentially. That's not only because there are more extreme weather events, which is happening. It's also because there are more expensive things to hit. So you have to always balance these numbers with the rest of the picture. It's everything has gotten more expensive. This is a consumer price index adjusted for inflation, but we've also just built more stuff, and so coastal properties getting wiped out, and buildings being hit by tornadoes and cars and so on being destroyed. Partly is that there's more there to hit, and it's partly that there is more extreme weather and more frequently, and more forceful winds and storms. But I want to step back a little bit from, well, not entirely. We'll talk a bit more on energy and climate, but stepping back a little from the focus on climate, I think it's possible that we can make too much of it, where these other issues, like inequality and the loss of biodiversity, water, overconsumption with its health problems and its environmental impact problems, the scarcity of other resources that we need, and the affordability. All of these things together, and there are other problems listed, you know, they're part of this dynamic system. And you can't really talk or think too much about one of them without understanding its relationship to the others. I don't expect anyone to grasp everything that's in this picture, but the point is, this is a system dynamics model. Everything has loops and arrows that connect to each other. What we're seeing as, for instance, political extremism is not happening in isolation of these other issues. And that's one of the main points I hope to convey of what I believe about what we're seeing in the world, is that all of these things are very, very closely related and indeed interdependent. This one is a picture from a couple of years ago when COVID-19 was the biggest thing on our mind, and we thought likely what will come next might be a recession. turns out we didn't get a recession. What we got instead was inflation. So the stimulus from the government and the central banks seems to have buoyed consumer confidence and business confidence. We haven't yet had a major recession, but we did have a great deal of inflation, which also, again, the interrelatedness of things that may have had some influence on the political outcomes that we've seen in the years um, since this picture was made. Coming bigger behind that, climate change is, I would say, again, not necessarily inevitable, but a degree of probability that you might as well bank on. I think it's safe to assume we're going to see, no matter what we do, we're going to see a continually changing climate, continually more extreme weather events, and then bigger yet than that, or I think more out of view at the moment, but coming along with is biodiversity collapse, which is happening because of how we're using resources, how we're changing the use of land, getting materials, and over harvesting the wild stocks of things like fish and trees that we still put into our economy. Energy, following climate because they are closely related. Again, everything in this presentation is, but very directly, we already talked about 40 billion tons of CO2 per year, 40 gigatons. That's coming from mostly these fossil sources, coal, oil, and gas, and somewhat from cement. That's not the energy that's required to produce cement, which is also carbon emitting, but cement itself, when it cures, has the process is called it's calcination, I think is the word. But anyway, it emits carbon dioxide when you when you use cement. And keep in mind the 40 gigatons, that's CO2. We'll talk a little further about greenhouse gas equivalents. How does this stack of energy from fossil sources compare to total energy? Well, it's by far the largest piece. It's blue in this graph, and we have increased how much renewable energy we've installed. But as you can see, going back over 200 years, we were using renewable energy in the beginning, hydro, wind, and biomass. And we've maybe about a little more than doubled, maybe tripled the amount of renewable energy that we use. But a fair part of what we consider the renewable part of the mix was there in the very beginning. And the much larger part of what has increased has been fossil energy. A lot of what's considered renewable is hydro energy and wood, and that's cooking and heating in the developing world. A couple of billion people still rely primarily on biomass, wood, and animal dung as their primary source of energy. 20 years ago, the fossil portion was 82% of global energy, and total energy use has increased by then. We've added a lot of renewable. We've spent $5.2 trillion on renewable energy. That's, again, that's a number that's hard to grasp, but it's truly phenomenal. For all that, we very slightly moved the proportion of fossil down from 82 to about 81% of global energy. And emissions are higher than ever before. We're using, like we mentioned a few slides back, about 100 billion barrels of oil equivalent per year. That's oil, gas, and coal. Why is it so hard to replace? Oil has about 1,700 kilowatt hours worth of energy per barrel, primary energy. A human, if they work a full 8-hour day, produces about 0.6 kilowatt hours worth of energy per day. So 1 barrel contains the energy equivalent of 10 years of human labor, if you could convert it perfectly, which you can't, but with conversion loss of about 50% on average, you've got about 5 years worth of human labor in a single barrel of oil. And our population is a little over 8 billion people, but we're supported by about 500 billion work years per year of fossil slaves, you could call it, that are carrying us around. That's about 62.5 work years per person. So each person on average who lives a year of modern life is supported by 62.5 work years worth of energy in the form of fossil fuels. And of course, that's not distributed evenly. But just if it were, imagine trying to take away 62.5 years worth of work from each person. And we'll see in a moment a little more how that's distributed. But then think about the advanced world is using a lot more than that. And imagine trying to get them to stop. Energy and GDP, which is a loose, but it's one of the only metrics that we have for quality of life. It's not completely accurate, of course, but there is a correlation. GDP and energy track very closely together, and this scale is showing electricity on the left and GDP on the bottom, but it's not a linear scale. Each line is double the one before. So if you look at the lowest energy user per capita, Sierra Leone population using less than 20 kilowatt hours per person per year, and their GDP is under $500 per person per year. Norway on the upper end is 1,000 times more energy intensive, using more than 20,000 kilowatt hours per person per year. And their GDP is over $100,000 per person per year. People looking at this data have asked the question, is it the fact that energy is GDP, that having energy is what creates wealth? Is it the same thing? Another way to look at it is that GDP means you're going to use energy. If you have wealth or means, then you will harness and use energy. Either way, it's the main point of this picture is that the people in the blue circles have built their way up to that point and are continuing to do it. There's no sign of any of the countries that have harnessed a lot of energy wanting to use less. And everyone in the orange circle is wanting to get where the blue ones are and beyond. Burundi in particular, just keep in mind, we'll come back to Burundi, but they're the lowest GDP of any country on this chart. And as it says in the big circle, there is no such thing as a low energy rich country. And for better or worse, everybody, well, on average, it's safe to say everyone wants to be rich. Clean energy investment has gone up. And you could consider this, and I do consider this to be a good thing. It's topped 2 trillion a year, and that's a little less than half of what is estimated that we actually need over the rest of this decade to get anywhere close to the carbon targets that some governments have agreed to, some have withdrawn from. But science says, we need to taper off our fossil energy use. And we're making some progress on installing cleaner energy sources, but less than half what we need to. And the whole while, carbon emissions are going up. One reason for that is that why are we spending so much money and getting so little effect? Fossil energy is there when you want it, and renewable energy is there when it happens to be. So a lot of the money is being spent on storage technologies. And there's a lot of thought that we could power the world's an advanced economy on renewable energy if we just had enough storage. Not with what we can do with today's technologies. That's just not going to happen. One, it costs far too much. Two, we don't have the material in the world to build it. And three, we still need enough generation to charge it. So it has losses in charging and discharging. And on the whole, it's not a viable replacement for, we'll see a little bit about what the example of Germany has tried to shift to renewables and how much that has cost, how much they still have to go, and how their energy mix has changed by focusing on renewables with the requirement for storage. Also importantly, energy storage has right now, the batteries that we can build today have about a 10 to 15 year useful life. And then you have to replace them. So here's that example from Germany. And this is showing carbon intensity in grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour. And Germany averages about 520 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour. In comparison, so the 24 hours a day, and you can see how it moves. The dip in emissions is in the middle of the day when the solar energy is producing. But in comparison to Great Britain, which has more nuclear energy in the mix, and France, which has the most nuclear energy of any country, well, as a country of any country, Ontario as a province has about equivalent or a little bit more nuclear in their mix than compared to France, but France is the most nuclear using of any country, and their emissions profile is very stable and very low, about a fifth of Germany's. Germany made the decision, they had more nuclear, but made the decision to go all renewable. And they actually shut off their nuclear energy. So this is a decrease. The changes is over about a 20-year period from, around 2020, around 2000 to around 2022. And they decreased their annual energy output from nuclear plants by 32.6 terawatt hours. And they had to add coal to back up the wind and solar. So they focused on renewables. They have some gas, some new solar and wind, but as they shut off the nuclear, they needed to back that up with coal. And they spent about $500 billion on renewable energy, not on the coal part, but just on the renewables. This has resulted in Germany having the most expensive power in the European Union, over 40 cents a kilowatt hour. And one of the reasons that their net emissions have actually gone down a little bit is that the industry in Germany, not all of it, of course, but a lot has left because they couldn't afford the energy. So they've gone to places where in Asia it's being powered with coal more cheaply. Versus Ontario, they emit about 20 times more carbon per kilowatt hour. The Ontario carbon intensity is around 24 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour versus 520 for Germany. And they have 70% renewable energy. But their target of getting to net zero, they say will cost about 10 times more. So they've made it 70% of the way with 500 billion. To get to net zero would take 5 trillion. So the final 30% is 10 times more expensive than the first 70%. And why is that? Well, a lot of it is the cost of the batteries, which again would have to be replaced after about 10 to 15 years. It's also that you need about 4 or 5 times as much generation capacity from renewables as your average load because they don't produce 100% of the time. This is called capacity factor, and the capacity factor of a well-operating nuclear plant is around 95 to 98%, similar for coal. But the capacity factor of wind is at best around 35%, and solar similar, 23% in Ontario, for instance. But you're never getting wind or solar power more than about a third of the time. And the areas, those are in the best areas. A lot of the places where renewables have been installed are not prime, so they're getting less than that. Oh, I should have mentioned in the beginning, all of these graphics are ones that I've clipped from the news, and I certainly don't mean to plagiarize anybody else's work, and hope I've left some sign of where things come from. But I am showing them as I think there's important information in them. I don't necessarily agree with all of the statements that are made in them or the people who produce them, just to be clear. But for instance, I'm saying that because this slide says proposed daftness. I wouldn't call it daftness. I think there's good reasons and good intentions, but the issue with over-reliance on, aside from the cost, is the reliability. With over-reliance on renewables, this picture has the initiate blackout button because that's one of the things that we are seeing happen in grids that put too much renewable energy into the mix. They are having challenges with reliability. And as you know, we talked about with the heating issue, if we were to stop heating, we would have more cost and more immediate cost of health and human life from the cold than we are from global warming. In the same way, if we interrupt power supplies, we'll have a much more immediate set of problems and impacts to human health and well-being than if we keep burning fossil energy. So I am opposed to continuing and to increasing carbon emissions. But if we're anti-carbon and also anti-nuclear, then what we end up with is pro-blackout, in my view. Or you could say, it can be done if we just apply enough money to the problem. But in that case, there's materials limitations that we'll talk about in a minute. But even if we didn't have the material limitation, the cost of going to zero carbon without nuclear and without blackouts is so exorbitant that we'd be talking about paying dollars per kilowatt hour as opposed to the cents that we pay now. And that simply isn't an option for even many people in the advanced economies, but certainly for the developing world. An example of going a little too far or a little too far, a little too fast without balancing resources. In Texas, they've added more wind now. They've decommissioned some coal and brought on renewables. They now have more wind than coal, and Texas has more solar than California. So these are good things on the whole, but they also destabilize their grid, and they had a couple of events on the extreme days. The hottest day of the year is when this happened. Oh no, this is the coldest day. This is an ice storm in February, and they had the same thing happen on one of their hottest days in July, I think a year after this data. They have a price cap of $9,000 per megawatt hour. These numbers are showing the monthly average. So monthly average for February of 2021 was $1,515, but it for a day or so hit the $9,000 per megawatt hour cap, which is $9 a kilowatt hour. So imagine energy bills. This caused some businesses to go bankrupt, shocked a lot of people, and was brief, but it was scary enough that Texas had to dramatically reassess what they were doing and have since added a lot of gas capacity to help to stabilize their grid. This headline was from one of their hot days. So on extreme weather days, the system struggles. People try to use it more for more heating or more air conditioning, and the extreme weather makes it more difficult for the system to operate. So it tends to be that when everybody needs it the most, they demand the most of it. It's having the hardest time. Higher temperatures, for instance, make it more difficult for wires to carry electricity. Resistance in the line increases, which itself causes heat. And this causes things to break down all at once when everybody needs them the most. So it can be a severe problem. As it says here, the power blows past the $9,000 cap. That's an artificial cap. That's a politically imposed price control. The real costs are actually higher. So if the consumers are not paying any more than 9,000, businesses then are losing money to provide the energy. And the reason this happened is that they had a bit too much solar, wind, and batteries, and also conditions that the grid was not built for. So everything started to, on the extreme cold day, they lost pressure in the gas lines, but they had, again, tried to change things in an overall good direction, but had done it in a way that created vulnerabilities to extreme cold, heat, and also extreme wind. The wind turbines don't work when the wind isn't blowing fast enough, but they also don't work when it's blowing too fast. So there's a range that they'll work in, and they will automatically shut themselves down if the wind gets too high. In Canada, we've had the extreme conditions straining the grid, and same thing, we've run out of power on the lowest wind days and the highest wind days of the year, which there's other things happening. There's storms, or there's on a low wind day, there might be extreme heat. And people are asking more of the grid at the same time that the resources are not there to back it up, and the failures tend to cascade. So that's why the pro blackout thing is an issue. One of the reasons this happens is that politicians make mandates, and it plays well to people who, with all good intentions, want a change. People in Canada want to reduce emissions, and this environmental minister, Stephen Guilbeault, like me, a former Greenpeacer, and I think with all of the right reasons for doing what he's trying to do, he made this announcement about banning gas-powered vehicles. The same announcement was made a different day in California, and funny enough, the same thing in both cases happened, which was within days or a day of the announcement about banning the internal combustion engine cars, there were also news articles about running out of water and running out of hydropower because of drought conditions. So the issue with the political mandates is make this happen, but at the same time, laws of physics are, we have about a third of our energy use. I mentioned before, about a third goes into heating and cooling buildings. About a third goes into industry and manufacturing, and about a third goes into moving things. So if we are to switch our transportation from fossil fuel powered to electric, for instance, then we need to approximately double our electric capacity. And we're already running into shortages as consumption of electricity has increased, but also vulnerabilities as there have been the more extreme weather conditions, which include droughts that have challenged the hydro dams to keep up. Resources to build all this stuff. If we talk, we overconsume the Earth's carrying capacity. And this slide is talking just about the renewable resources. Is showing Earth Overshoot Day, which is now happening in about July every year. And say 50 years ago, it was we would make it almost the whole year before we used a year's worth of productivity. And this isn't natural productivity, environmental, trees and the air. Environmental services include filtering water, producing the air we breathe, producing fish, producing trees that we use. And we now, in 1 year, consume about 1.75 Earth's worth of production. So about 2/3 of the way through the year, we have consumed an entire year's worth of environmental regeneration, forests and fish. The stocks are shrinking. About 90% of fish gone doesn't mean all the fish in the world. It means the fish stocks that we value. So things like tuna, cod, and the salmon, the fish that we like to eat. About 9 out of 10 of where they were 100 years ago are now gone. And they're continuing in most cases. There's some small local exceptions where fishery management has gone well, but in most cases, we're continuing to draw down faster than regeneration. That's one of the things that I always found a bit scary when looking at the limits to growth curves. We put still, it's in the tens or hundreds of millions of tons of fish on plates every year. And if those fishery stocks completely collapse, I mean, there really isn't anything standing by to replace that. And what would it mean if, on a macro level, we were to lose as a source of protein, a supply as large as what we've leaned on the ocean to be? What happens after that is not a great picture. Again, this consumption is not distributed equally. If all 8 billion or so people consumed at the rate that we do in the USA, it would take about 3.5 Earths to equal in a year of production what we consume. Now, talking about the non-renewable, and this goes back to the issues. One of the biggest issues that I see with an all renewable approach to the energy transition away from fossil fuels. This is showing how much copper came out of the mine that made that pit. And we need a lot of copper for energy technologies. Even kind of scarier is the little tiny dot that's representing the diamonds that came out of that pit. And believe it or not, they're not just for people to wear and look pretty. We use diamonds for industry, and one of the things we use them for is the wire saws that cut the silica wafers that make solar panels. Use little diamond particles, but diamond mining is an industrial as well as consumer-facing kind of production. And if we look at copper in the top row here as one of the key metals that we need for the energy transition, this is not all of them, but these are the major ones, or most of the major ones. To produce one generation of technologies that would replace fossil fuels, and remember they have a useful life for batteries of 10 to 15 years, solar panels 20 to 25 years. We expect we'd need about 4.5 billion tons. We know of about 880 million tons, so the known reserves cover about 1/5 of the requirements of copper for one generation of renewable energy. But it gets worse if we look at the other ones. There's only 3.5% of the cobalt that we believe we'd need, 3.5% of the graphite, 10% of the lithium, 10% of the nickel, and 3.5% of the vanadium. Adequate reserves, we believe, of the rest. The other issue that comes with this, as well as just not having enough and the cost of trying to get it, is the social and environmental impact. But I'm sure you've heard most of the cobalt is coming out of Africa and the Congo, where labor conditions and what environmental regulations are, let's just say, not good. We're using 14% of the world's global silver supply to produce solar panels, which it seems that we have enough. We believe there's enough silver, although, of course, there's an impact of mining it, to produce one generation of enough renewable energy to replace fossil fuels. But I think, again, it's a little outside of the general awareness that we're putting 14% of our total global supply of silver into solar panels. And it's just, I think it's a useful sort of an eye-opening metric on the cost of renewable energy and what it takes to match what we do with fossil is still, like the previous slide was showing, in silver, 145,000 tons, and we believe 530,000 in known reserves. So for the first generation, we have adequate reserves. We could do it a few times, but if we want to replace the energy that we use from fossil fuels with all renewable, it's going to require draining the reserves of all the metals that go into those technologies. How does that compare to other solutions? Because everything, I think we have to think about not as its own impacts, but what are the trade-offs of that option versus something else? And the electric cars use about 5 times more metals and minerals than internal combustion engines. Same with power generation. If we look at offshore or onshore wind or solar, all of them are, those renewable options are using more materials than nuclear is the lowest material requiring non-emitting option. And then coal and natural gas use yet less. But the same list of metals, copper, lithium, nickel, manganese, cobalt, they're the ones that were on the other slide, showing that those are the ones that we need more of and don't have enough of. Also important to note, this is in kilos of the material per megawatt. And remember that capacity factor for solar is usually 20 to 35%, and for wind, usually 30, maybe in some cases as high as 40%, whereas nuclear is above 90%. So per megawatt of nameplate capacity, you get about 3 to 5 times more energy out of a nuclear plant than you do out of the same nameplate capacity of a renewable system. There are other resources that go into building these things besides the rare earth metals and the fancy metals. Just the steel and about 650 tons of concrete per wind tower means there's a sizable embedded carbon footprint. And they do have much shorter, that's about half the useful life of, say, a nuclear power plant. They have a lower capacity factor, and they require, we've just been talking about the generation, they also require the backup of backup in the form of dispatchable generation that, like with Germany and their use of coal, is emitting carbon along with the renewable energy, such that they end up now emitting more carbon than they were before they started the push to renewable, or storage, which again is expensive and requires a lot of material. We hear about nuclear waste all the time. I think if you hear the word nuclear, the first thing you think is nuclear waste. we don't really frame other things in the same terms. Like we don't talk so much about fossil waste, though that's what it is. Um, Carbon emissions are fossil waste, and we don't hear much talk at all about renewable waste. But one of the issues with it is that the mining, maintenance, and disposal is turning the Earth's crust inside out to get at all that material, which contaminates the local watersheds. And when it comes time to dispose of them, they can leach the heavy metals like lead and cobalt into watersheds, which, while nuclear waste has a long, dangerous life, heavy metals have a permanent, they have no half-life, so they don't over time become less dangerous. And the waste from producing renewable energy is quite significant. It's not talked much about, I think. And along with the other issues, the just inadequacy of the resource to provide stable and affordable power, and the inadequacy of the amount of materials that we have to build it. If we were to maximize, build all that we possibly could, the renewable waste impact would also be quite significant. So this all ties in with population, which we can look at. I think it is kind of dramatic on the scale we're seeing here over 1,000 years, but is better shown if we go back 10,000 years or 12,000 years. The run up in the human population is absolutely phenomenal. I think the most important thing in the context of the work that I do about it is that this would never have been possible without harnessing the energy that we have. If we had not started using, I showed earlier the slide that on average, there's, for every human year of life, there's 62 and a half like work effort equivalent years in terms of fossil energy supporting that life, not evenly distributed, but just on average. If we didn't do that, the population would never have gotten to where it is. And that's to say, we don't need all this energy necessarily. It's just that we have come to use it, and we need it now because we relied on it to get to this point. And if we suddenly stopped, this huge increase in population is partly due to improvements in medicine and sanitation, things like that. But that limits to growth set of curves that I showed at the beginning, every one of these humans is a mouth to feed, and it's the harvest of wild caught food like fish and other things. The developing world in particular still relies a lot on catching wild species, but it's the production of food that is, and the moving it around and processing it, that's causing a lot of the land change use, and is runs on a tremendous amount of energy. What's likely to happen? This is the official picture. The population growth curve, we're around 8 billion in 2023, projected to be approaching 10 billion by 2050, and then projected to peak in the 2080s at about a little shy of 10.5 billion. The official picture is not the one that is shown in the Limits to Growth report. This is what the UN and governments put up when they talk about what they expect to happen with population over the rest of the century. And what it shows is a smooth leveling out. It starts to curve downward, but it's not a dramatic curve downward. And the expectation, or the I guess talking point about this, is that what will happen is that our affluence and quality of life will increase, and people will naturally start to have fewer children. And so this is all about fertility decreasing. This is not about, it's not saying that we'll have a dramatic increase in premature deaths, but for the population to level out or to decrease, the death rate has to equal or exceed the birth rate, and you can have either of those things happen. The official line is that we'll smoothly transition into a low fertility society. That's not what the limits to growth projections anticipate or show. What's those trend lines that they projected out in the 1970s and that we've been following move into a phase where we have an inadequacy of food supply and of other means to support the size of the population that has grown up with all the advances in agriculture and food production and all the use of energy. And we go into a period where the death rate exceeds the birth rate, not necessarily because people are having fewer children, but because things are going quite bad. That line that's supposed to come in there according to governments sometime in the 2080s, it's a bit earlier in the limits to growth projection. It's more in the 2050s. We're on this part of the curve now, but what exactly is going to happen out here is, yeah, I don't think inevitable. I don't think a foregone conclusion, but I think it's going to be tough. And I don't think it's going to follow the kind of public version of the story that the governments are saying it is. Our impact on the planet is not just how many people there are, it's the number of people times how much each of us consume or how much consumption is happening on average. And one of the biggest problems, in my view, that we have is that the people who can make choices, who are really free to choose to do more or less and are not, say, at the edge of survival, are choosing to consume more. And by more, I mean a lot more. The top 1% control about half of the world's wealth, and the top 10% produce about half of the world's emissions. And that's, I mean, it's really staggering to me. I'm not even sure how we are doing this, but the top 50% produce about 90% of the emissions, and the bottom 50, obviously, about 10. So what would happen if the richest 10% are showing the aspiration lifestyle that everybody wants to attain and are not choosing to do less? Well, certainly the poor are not choosing to be poor. And if they could, they would move up. The rich are not choosing to conserve, at least not. I mean, maybe they're not burning as much as they absolutely could if their only goal was to consume, but they're not conserving to stay anywhere in line with an average. And if all 100% of the world's population were emitting carbon at the rate of the top 10%, then 10 times half of the world's emissions would be 500% of the world's emissions. So we have 5x of what we currently do. And that, yeah, concerns me very much. I think that absent some kind of shift in what we take to be a good way to live, absent a real change in aspiration of what it means to be successful, there's no technology that will solve the challenges that we have. So that's one of the things that, I can do what I can with investments in clean energy, and I can think that I'm, picking the best energy mix and hope that that's true. But if we don't choose to live a bit differently, then I don't know that it will do any good. This is one of those pictures that I didn't create, and full disclosure, I'm more of a liberal than anything else. But well, of any of the given parties. I think I'd rather work on and be known for thinking clearly on something that is neither what the liberal or the conservative parties have put forward. I'm not sure that independent is it either, but it is true that having a climate czar with half a dozen houses, a dozen cars, two yachts, and a private jet um, doesn't really strike the right tone. And to be flying around the world proposing that people use less energy while being waited on hand and foot at fancy dinners. And I can say this from personal experience. I've been in these kinds of places where literally, I mean, literally, they are putting gold dust on the desserts, literal gold dust. And they're talking about the conferences on energy and how we need to do more to clean our energy mix. And the consumption and the waste is just unbelievable. I don't know how we can expect that to work for the world. And I'm not sure exactly what to do about it. It's something that you have to go and have the meetings and have the conversations and work with the people who are active. But it can be very challenging to not feel that you're hypocritical or part of the problem when you see the way that the lifestyles that we live in the advanced world, and we try to think about how to limit emissions and limit overconsumption as a global population. So we have a credibility problem, and we have a role model problem. I don't know anyone, honestly, that I can look up to in a position of significant influence and say, yes, that's exactly the model that we should be holding out. And in reality, I too, not just these guys I'm criticizing, but I also want to have more. I think everybody wants to have more. Or it's a very rare person who actually wants to have less than they do, and works to as some talk about degrowth. I don't think degrowth is a catchy theme. So we really need, I think, as a population and as individuals and in our communities, to talk and think a bit more about what's realistically attainable for all, how much is enough, what are we willing to share, and with whom. Consumerism, I think, is as much, if not more, of the problem than any of the rest of the things that I've talked about. And we are now in the sixth mass extinction. This is not speculative, it's pretty well documented, losing entire branches of the tree of life. And it's happening and is rapidly accelerating. And as the picture shows, it's not a meteor this time. It's everybody in their own way. But I think that setting the example from the top is that's as much the issue as the emissions from the top 1 or 10%, is that they're holding that up as a lifestyle that everyone should get excited about in the movies and on the screen and want for themselves. And we don't see this as much when, especially if we live in cities. If you go out to where things come from, to the mine sites or onto the ocean, and you really go and look at what's moving when you hit the button on the machine by swiping the credit card in the checkout line, the machine that's moving. If you zoom out, it looks kind of something like this. So I've come to believe that if you take any natural resource and you subject it to market forces, it will not last. And I think we are still doing that kind of almost entirely. Like that's the dominant theme of our economy, is that we look at something not as its value and as part of a dynamic system or an environment, but we look at anything that we can lay hands on. The cost of bringing it to market is what we expend in effort and resources to go and get it. So we call the cost of water the cost of pumping it. And we make no distinction whether that comes from a renewable aquifer or a fossil aquifer that took 1,000,000 years to build up, and when depleted for all intents and purposes in our lifespan will be gone forever. We don't price that, and that's, I think, the rules behind the economy are as much an issue as the drive to consumerism. But we have technology, and so talk a little bit about how absolutely incredible it is and what it can and can't do. This picture is mind-blowing. Tech, as the slide says here, is amazing. A terabyte that fits on that little fingertip thing is about, it's exactly 200,000 times more memory than this great big 5 megabyte hard disk that is being pushed up that ramp 70 years before. So we have made unbelievable advances. But tech, as incredible as it is not magic. The energy that we use, we're still in a world lit by fire, and still most of that is fossil. The virtual, even this call that we're doing now and the recording of it that will go on YouTube, it has a real impact, and data needs a lot of energy to run. A single data center consumes about 100 megawatts. That's enough to power a small town. And the entire internet, nobody actually knows, but it's estimated to require about 307 gigawatts to stay on. That's about 500 average size nuclear reactors, which is more than the entire nuclear fleet of the entire world. There's about 480 nuclear reactors operating in the world. So if we more than doubled it, that's how much generation would be required to support the internet. I've heard that posting a single photo to Instagram is equivalent to leaving a light bulb on in your house for a year. So we think this stuff is, I think, like free. We think it doesn't cost us anything to post a photo on Instagram, and we think that because we hold the world's information on a device in our pocket, we're really kind of in control of things. But behind it, the amount of energy that it's consuming is truly staggering. And people get excited about some of the new technologies as if a technology solution alone can solve our problems, or financial fintech will free us from the central banking system, when a single Bitcoin transaction consumes the energy of like 2.5 American households for a year. So I think we get a little over-dazzled by the technology, and while it can do great things, and I think there's something to it, I think we need to be careful about how divorced we are from the impact that it has and how magical we take it to be. And it's not going down, by the way. We're using more. A Google search took less than 1 watt hour to run a search, and we're using orders of magnitude more as we get into AI-powered search. The training of AI models consumes in energy about 500 tons of CO2 equivalent. Compare that to other things we do. An internal combustion engine car, in its entire lifetime, building it and running it, including fuel, produces about 63 tons of CO2 equivalent. So, and an average person in a year, US person, doing everything they do, about 18 tons. And the average human life worldwide is about less than a third of that, about 5.5 tons. And less than a ton to fly one passenger from New York to San Francisco. So the AI boom is quite exciting, of course. You can think good and bad things about it. but it's very energy intensive, and there's some awareness of that. You see news about data centers buying nuclear power plants, for instance, and signing deals with nuclear companies. But I think most of the time, most of us using the technology are not as aware as we ought to be of how much of an impact it's having. And I'm going to speed up a little bit because I know we've been here for a long time. The investment in technology, clean energy technology, is increasing. That's a good thing. I made this slide before Elon got into his whole political bent, so I didn't like him before it was cool to not like him, but now I actually think that a lot of what he's done is quite damaging. And politics aside, he has promoted a big flashy ideas and this techno optimist notion that will become a multiplanetary species, will save the world through tech. But the details in the screenshot, I think, are quite interesting. He posted this. Oops. And 7 hours later, it had been commented on 12,500 times. It had been reshared 17,500 times, and 177,000 people had liked it. But I'm guessing what they liked was I think what draws attention is what's in the top of the picture, the arc of space and the salvation of humanity. And I don't know if he even noticed, was it a slip or was it intentional? What's going on in the bottom of the picture, which I think is the real story. There's a group of armed people with like helmets and gas masks on and guns holding back the crowds of impoverished and brown people who, as the zoo's worth of animals are loaded onto the ark. And I find it very telling. And I worry about some of the techno optimistic views are that we should have technology in advance as a species, regardless of anything else. When I think there's a lot to be done on Earth, and I think the issues of consumerism and of greed and of wanting to be above others are more likely to sink our ship than not being able to inhabit Mars. Okay, what have we said, and what are we actually doing around technology and energy? The trends that we're on show that we're heading to use more material. That's the mass material extraction in billions of tons. This is a lot of material. We're on track to make more money. That's the value in GDP. And we're on track to emit more carbon. That's the CO2. And there's a range projected. There's a range projected for all of them, a high and a low scenario. And the dark line is the trend of what we're most likely to do. The range encompasses what we've said we want to do. We say that we want to level off on material. That's the low use scenario. It's kind of a straight line. We say in any case we want to make more money. Even in the low scenario, GDP is going up. And we say that we're going to go to net zero. That's the projected low scenario of carbon emissions, where we've said we're going to hit net zero by 2050. And there's these government commitments to that target. But wait, one thing to clarify, I said 40 gigatons of CO2. So why is this showing that we're already at about 55? That's 53 gigatons in 2017. Because this is all greenhouse gases. So there's about another quarter more of CO2 equivalents in the form of methane and NOx, or nitrous oxides, and water as well as the greenhouse gas. So these, like the trend lines, the dark lines, are somewhat realistic. The projections and the commitments are a little gobsmacking. Like what's the thinking? And incidentally, the target of net zero by 2050 has stayed in place as we've year by year continued to emit more. So what is it going to take to get to net zero? Magic, frankly. If we keep the target around 2050 and keep following the trend line up, we're going to have to keep bending the line in really impossible ways. And I think if the politicians were engineers, someone would have said something to them kind of like this, where the miracle occurs. I think he should be a bit more explicit, like how is that supposed to happen? And I'll just say my personal opinion is it's not. So if apologies if anyone had hopes of getting to net zero by 2050, I just don't think that it's going to happen at all. And I don't think there's any chance whatsoever of it happening this century without either a large amount of population die-off or a large amount of nuclear energy. Last point on the list, and we'll cruise through it, because I think, again, everybody's well aware that we're in a situation with heightening geopolitical tensions. And resource wars, I think, have been going on for a while. I think the resources may be, in some sense, the only thing that has ever actually caused wars. I think they look like other things, like religious conflicts, but if you get down to it, what they're fighting over is access to land and water and energy and food. Energy, water, and resources and the space to exist in are all going to be increasingly contentious, I'd say. And unscrupulous people will use that. People who are sitting at the top of the stack and who want to divide and conquer those beneath them will point to the issues of scarcity and rile up a populist base by saying, I'll protect you from the outsider who wants to take what you have. And I honestly think that there's a version of this across all parts of the political spectrum, and that the idea that government needs to help or prevent their constituency from being abused is a bit of a dangerous one, because the people who are looking for that and not understanding the issues, not understanding that political kind of commitments can't alter the laws of physics, they're going to, I believe, already are and will increasingly kind of mob to their side of the political spectrum and point fingers at the other side. I think it's a very dangerous situation. I don't think we need to spend too much time on this. This is about, tying the resource issues into geopolitical tensions. China has taken the strategy of being dominant in the energy transition, and they are the red bar that is doing the majority of processing and manufacturing of materials. And zoom in on the graphite one. China is massively 4x over outproducing the rest of the world in graphite. All these materials are what goes into the batteries in electric vehicles and in the energy transition generally. And in just looking at batteries, one of the top 10 companies producing them is in Japan. 3 are in South Korea, and all the rest, the red ones, are in China. And you remember from before that the electric vehicles and the renewable energy technologies require more of these materials than conventional. So it's interrelated again, the dynamic system where we're trying to achieve carbon reduction and an energy transition, relying on these materials, which are largely controlled by one country, which we have some tensions with. I'd just leave it at, you're probably going to keep seeing things about this in the news. Space is also a challenge. And this, whether or not there are international tensions, if we're internally within a country looking at where to put things and what to build, the bubbles on this are representing, the bubble size represents how much material has to go into building it. And then this up the left side is how much material goes through it in its use. So, the fossil ones are at the top there because they use fuel. And nuclear uses fuel, but a lot less material goes through it than fossil. Wind and solar, in their useful life, they require some maintenance, and there's some material throughput there. And then the bottom is how much space it needs. And it's not linear or 2x, it's a 10x logarithmic scale. So in the bottom corner, a nuclear small modular reactor producing 300 megawatts can sit on 5 acres, and the same amount of solar energy would take 30,000 acres. And the solar would also require batteries. So biomass is by far the least energy dense. And just want to pause on that for a moment because there's a lot of talk about biomass being a good replacement for fossil fuels, promise of good biomass. But is it sustainable? And I know you can't read this, but this is a study that was published by John Sterman, is the director of the Department of System Dynamics at MIT. He's the guy I went to study under. And this article came out after I was there, but what they have found and studied carefully and documented is that the combustion and processing efficiencies of wood are less than coal. And so the immediate impact of substituting wood for coal is an increase in atmospheric CO2 relative to coal. We've gone on for a long time, and I've given you way too much information, so I'm not going to dwell on this, but just leave it that the amount of space, the CO2 impact, and the deforestation that is going with some of the shifts to biomass are, I'm pretty sure, actually a lot worse than if we had not done it at all. Use of space, we can produce renewable energy with solar. That's a good thing. We absolutely in no possible way can produce as much energy as we use on our rooftops. So we use far more energy as, again, total population, all dwelling spaces, thinking of cities where half of the world's population is now in cities. If you go and put on top of the built environment where people live solar panels and try to power those lifestyles, it doesn't come anywhere close. So we need other space. And that means converting either forest or farmland or something else. I actually snapped a picture of a magazine that was on Dean Stevens' table when I was there visiting and working on these slides. So this is local news from somewhere in the area around Boston. And it has become an issue with renewable energy throughout, especially the Midwest. A lot of projects have gotten challenged, and communities have won against developers who are trying to take up space with wind or solar. I think, what I wanted to get at here is that we have the spikes here showing the height of a spike is the density of the population. There's some very densely populated areas and some relatively sparse ones. And if you look in particular at there's a couple of lines there. Those are 2 rivers. So people need to be where there's water, and there's going to be increasing pressure on some of those population centers. People are going to want to be moving around. And so we're thinking in Canada about modular construction, about the water that's here, and how we can help with this situation. I mentioned earlier to remember Burundi. It's the 4th fastest growing population. And you remember about it that it was the lowest per capita GDP of any of the countries on that energy and GDP graph. Over 70% of the population is below the poverty line. And all of these top 10 populations, they're growing from internal growth. That's not because of immigration. That's birth rates. Canada, on the other hand, is growing mostly, like, we're below replacement fertility, but we're growing through immigration, and it has already become a bit of a challenge. I expect that to increase. That's part of the reason I came up here, is to work on that. But we added 1.25 million in a year's time. I think we've now gone up to adding, what was on the last slide? We had almost 500,000 in 1 quarter in 2023. And we currently lack the infrastructure and capital stock in this country to adequately absorb the current population growth and improve our quality of living, our standard of living. So that is one of the things that I think is a relatively simple opportunity. This picture comes from a project in Maine where actually my brother is working on affordable housing, but doing low cost and modular construction that creates a living space is one of the things that we hope to help address some of these challenges, just creating affordable and low energy living for people. Another is with food. Production of livestock in particular creates CO2 emissions. Poultry is much less than beef, and poultry has passed beef and pork as a source of protein for the population not so long ago. And we can feed poultry and fish on insects. So we're looking in Canada at the embedded water that goes into food and forest farming techniques to be more sustainable in how we use there's an abundant water supply in Canada, especially relative to other parts of the world. We're looking at how can we most sustainably turn that into food for people. Insect farming is something that's being done. I think it's a stretch to get people to want to eat a lot of insects, but I think insects as feeds for other animals, is for chickens and fish in particular, is a good solution. And the risks and the pressure on immigration and extremism are coming in part because of the imbalances in the world. And the colonial legacy is something that it is still very much felt among the First Nations that I work with and in the populations that have been resource extraction sites historically. The translation of this is in Spanish, but he's saying, "I'm sorry, it's impossible. You can't enter. There's not enough for everyone. There's not enough for everyone." If you think about, an expensive coffee or chocolate and a country that goes with that. Sorry, my head running over.
Tristan, did we lose you?
Sound check. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, now we hear you.
Okay.
We should wrap up pretty soon.
Yep.
Lunch is
we're at the
served.
end.
Thanks. Go ahead.
If you think of expensive coffee or chocolate and a country, you probably think Italian or French, not Ethiopia or Somalia, which is where they come from. If you think, for coffee, if you think chocolate, Belgian or Swiss, not Mexico or the Olmec people, which is where they come from. So one of the things that we're working on is trying to keep from production sites in Canada and work with other indigenous populations around the world on vertical integration so that their raw goods are turned into higher value items in country as opposed to just being commodity extraction sites and having the value add and the profit on those things happen in other places. Cruising through this, just technology, I think one of the neat opportunities is to look back toward the systems that exist in nature that God created and work in a balanced way. We see biomimicry that looks very cool, like with this high-speed bullet train being inspired by a kingfisher. But there are really simpler ways, like balanced agriculture, permaculture working as an ecosystem versus agriculture working with in a chemical intensive way. We're looking at forest farming, and for instance, we can tell the health of fish population by counting the insect larvae that are in a watershed and working on a whole ecosystem approach to food production, both wild harvested and in um, managed systems. Ecosystem services are not just filtering water and producing air. If you, you know, it's quite intuitive that if you look at a paved surface and a plant, you know that the paved one will be hotter um, in the summer sun. And this is what I mentioned before about photosynthesis is a process that takes in energy. It's using the solar energy to build biomass. So it's like the melting of ice or boiling of water. It's an endothermic process that pulls thermal energy out of the air around it. And this again is why space and what do we use it for? Just like a parking lot is hotter in July than a forest, so also is a field of solar panels. And we can't ignore the full thermal impact. You know, the changing of CO2 emissions relating to how we produce energy is important, but what did the solar field replace? And if it's not going on the top of a building, if a forest was cut down to build it, and if the solar panels were produced in China in a plant burning coal and installed in the north in a place that doesn't get good sun, it's not as clear a win as we might hope it would be. Um, I'm going to skip a few, and I just wanted to highlight that as big as the Earth looks, we talked about this before with how thin the atmosphere really is. There's actually relatively very little of what sustains life on it compared to the rest, and it's very unevenly distributed. So most of the world and most of the world's population is water insecure, and we who are relatively privileged in terms of wealth and also water and land need to think about what's the rest of the world experiencing and what's it going to experience as climate conditions become more extreme over the rest of the century, and how are we going to manage those relationships. Um, Final point on technology. What's real about this picture? It is true that the farmers in Europe are not happy and that they're not trusting the government. So there were trucker protests in Canada, there were farmer protests in Europe about carbon rules. But what's not real is this whole picture. This never happened. This is AI generated, and we're having a real crisis of knowing what to believe anymore. So what I'm trying to get at with this is that in all these extreme times, there's also, you know, the extreme influence of social media and information is a big part of it. And we have to be really careful about knowing what's actually going on. That's why I wanted to give this, I realize, excessively information heavy and excessively long talk to all of you is that this stuff is more complex than meets the eye, and the hopes for renewable energy or for you know, if we just solve climate or if we get stay under 1.5 degrees C and get to net zero by 2050, um, there's a lot more to the picture. And if you spend your time with it and dig into it, it proves to be more challenging than one might initially think. But it's very important, I think, to address the reality and to try to get beyond what pops up in memes and what gets chattered about on social media. And as the times that we're in become more uncertain, I think trust is going to be in increasingly short supply. So we want to work on our relationships and work on knowing each other better and building trust where we can. Um, Real quick, Ontario had about 36% of its energy from coal and switched all that to nuclear. And they have a world-leading carbon intensity of around 28, 24 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour. And they did that at a cost of 11 cents per kilowatt hour. And that's in contrast to Germany with the 520 grams of CO2 intensity and 40 cents per kilowatt hour. So I don't think that technology is the answer to everything, but I think that if we want to decarbonize, we have to take a second look at nuclear. I know a lot of there's been a lot of bad publicity around the issue of nuclear waste, and I want to leave you with the possibility that it may be less bad and more necessary than you might think if you don't spend a decade in the energy sector working on decarbonization and looking at the trade-offs of the different technologies. One of the criticisms of nuclear is that it costs too much, but every mega project does. And this is a graph of the plan in blue and the actual to build an oil pipeline, which came out about 4 times greater than the projected plan. And that happens that the numbers with the big dig in Boston, I'm sure you've all had some experience with, are even far worse than these energy projects. But if you look at the funding sources for the information campaigns around nuclear, it turns out that the majority of the funding against nuclear has come from the fossil industry. And I believe that's because it's the only technology that actually threatens the fossil industry business model. So I'd encourage people, if they're on the fence about nuclear or curious about how we might address decarbonization, to take a closer look. Recap on that, the challenges are more challenging than is commonly understood. Personally, I don't see a positive way forward without adding a lot more nuclear, but technology alone is definitely not going to solve our problems. I think there are simpler solutions than moving to Mars, which include developing cleaner energy, learning from nature, building affordable and energy efficient housing, changing our food systems, living with less, and helping each other and sharing. And these are the things that these are my sort of toolkit of solutions that I'm mostly working on. And I'll close out by saying I hope that there was something useful in this for you. I know that I had an idea in mind when I set out to deliver the presentation, and that what I actually did was different than that idea. So hopefully this was of interest and of use. And given that we are at the Boston Community Church, although Dean opened it saying that we do less on Jesus, I'll share a little bit of scripture. It is Easter, and he is risen, and he said that things will get worse. You'll see some tough times. They will get worse, but then they'll get better. And there will be people who take advantage of this. They will go from bad to worse, deceiving and being deceived. But the most repeated command in the whole Bible is to be happy. And Jesus himself is quoted as saying 365 times some version of "do not be afraid" or "fear not, fear nothing." And I think there's something in that at least once every day of the year you can be reminded, do not be afraid. And in 1 Peter 4:8, we are reminded to, above all, love each other deeply. So that's what I'd like to. If you remember anything from this whole talk, remember that. And thank you for bearing with me for this long presentation. I'll stop there and hand it back to you, Dean. Thank you.
Tristan Jackson, folks, thank you so much, Tristan. We compare everything that's like this with Daniel Ellsberg, who went on for over 2 hours, and we were hanging on his every word, and we were hanging on your every graph. So thank you, Tristan. And the final takeaway is, don't worry, be happy. Don't worry, be happy. And I will not sing a last song because there are two incredible folks in our audience who each have something they want to tell you, Tristan, or they want to ask you. And let's start with Calvin. Look right at the camera there.
I don't know if you can see this, Tristan, but I'm wearing a Vinyl Haven Historical Society T-shirt today. Can you see it?
Right on. I love the Historical Society on Vinyl Haven.
My family lived 5 generations on Vinyl Haven, and my great-great-grandfather, Joseph Delano Airy, married Susan Calderwood Green, who was the granddaughter of Joseph Green of Green's Island. And I don't know if you're aware of that genealogy, but
Yes.
I'm curious, having listened to your talk, what role did your growing up on Green's Island have with your life interest in?
Yeah, that's a great question, and a huge one, I'd say. First of all, my family moved out there to kind of be part of the Back to the Land movement. They were, big followers of Scott and Helen Nearing and the Colemans, and went out to Green's Island to live a simpler life and to have less of a negative impact on the planet. And that intention and philosophy were huge to me growing up and still are. The experience of having nature as a teacher, as Dean said, was homeschooled out there and spent most of my time outdoors and running around. And I think just clean air and plants and the natural environment were really influential and positive and informative for me. Technologically, one of the things that struck me is that we never did quite realize the dream of becoming, we were off grid. We didn't have grid power. We didn't have any pavement. Everything that moved on the island was carried by hand. But we still carried out there tanks of fossil fuels. We still used chainsaws. We still got food from the grocery store. We never did become independent of the system that runs, all of society and all the world. I also had a really deep appreciation for the amount of energy that we use thoughtlessly in the developed world when we carried all our water in buckets and we heated that water over a wood stove. Just taking a bath was a totally different thing than, when I went to college and lived with sort of normal mainstream mainland people, and they would just turn the hot water tap on and leave it running. I was just shocked and horrified. I couldn't believe it. But they had no connection to the effort and the energy that it takes to do things without the developed system. So I think it gave me a deep appreciation for how hard it is to live without modern conveniences, and that there's value in trying, but that we need something that's neither. To walk out in the woods and build a shack like my parents did, which for all its benefits was challenging and didn't achieve complete independence from the rest of the system. And we need something between that and the mainstream, just have no awareness of what's at the other end of the switch or the credit card swipe or the water tap. So it's motivated me a lot to try to find that medium, to find a place of balance in quality of life and minimal impact, and making the connection between the way we live and what it does in the rest of the world clearer to people who otherwise wouldn't have any direct reason to see that or know.
Hi there. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Timothy Havel. I worked for about 10 years in the Department of Nuclear Science and Engineering at MIT, after which I became a Sloan Fellow at MIT Sloan, where I also studied system dynamics under John Sterman. After graduating, I worked for about a year on creating a system dynamics model of the semiconductor industry supply chain. Uh, While I agree with the vast majority of what you've said today, and I thank you for it, it was a succinct summary, actually, of all that could be said about this. I have also an almost infinite number of quibbles I could raise with it, and I'd love to discuss this more with you offline. Right now, I'll just make 2 points. The first is that there is no proliferation-proof version of nuclear energy. If you have an intense source of neutrons, you can make plutonium and you can make bombs. And if either as a result of that or due to the other issues you also touched on, there is a thermonuclear war on this planet. Everything other point you've made today is completely moot. That's my first point. And the cost of that, I think, should be ascribed infinity. The second point is that after graduating from the Sloan, I went off and tried to do an energy storage startup because I saw energy storage as an alternative to nuclear energy if you could come up with a technology that overcomes most of the limitations that you have touched upon. I had one. It has essentially trivial resource requirements. I'll leave it at that for the description of it for now. But I will merely say I was never raised a dime for my startup, despite working on it for over 5 years. And I eventually retired and let my patents expire. It still needs work, and it needs money. It suffered, if nothing else, from energy storage, no matter how you look at it, suffers in spades from Clayton Christensen's innovator's dilemma, plus the fact on top of it that the market is not really a market, it's a political entity, totally regulated. So that alone would have stopped me. I could go on about the other things, such as Congress failing to put a price on carbon, the price of natural gas falling through the floor because byproduct of fracking for oil is gas, and that brought the price of gas down to nothing. And of course the price of lithium-ion batteries has fallen tenfold during the period I was trying to do it. So I'll leave it at that. I'm looking forward to talking with you more. I hope you are too. Thank you.
Thank you, Timothy. Yes. I would love to sit, have a coffee and talk about many topics. I'm sure every one that we just covered and that you would have a quibble with, and then probably for each of those a dozen more. It sounds like we have a lot of shared history and connections. And I do agree that thermonuclear war is an existential issue that would render all the rest moot if it were inevitable. I think the big difference between the threat of extinction from nuclear war and the rest of what I was talking about is that we can just not hit the trigger and not trigger not set off the war, whereas the feedback loops in the systems of the planet, once they've kind of gotten they can run out of our control. Like we can not strike the match if we still have it in the box, but once we've lit the forest on fire, it can get beyond us. The other thing on thermonuclear, you're right. There's no way to make nuclear power completely proliferation resistant. That's true. And that's not really the target that nuclear power operators or regulators aim for. What they aim for is to make diversion of material detectable in a time frame that would make it difficult for an operator to build up enough of a charge to do a lot of damage. And I think on that front, we're in a range of being reasonably effective. And the issue of a new country like in Iran or somebody that has nuclear ambitions that we question, getting a hold of nuclear power plants and then producing nuclear bombs. I think that's on such an absolutely minuscule scale compared to the nuclear powers of Russia and the US that already exist. And those, I think, are the real nuclear threats, and preventing anyone else from having nuclear power, I don't think will eliminate the nuclear stockpiles of the US and Russia, which seem to, they're in place being clung to pretty tightly. So I don't know what would get rid of them.
will close by saying that whether those bombs go off or not, it's all part of the same system. And you've pointed out its many vulnerabilities, and when it goes, it could all go at once. Thank you.
I hope that we can get the two of you together, maybe at one of our Friday afternoon luncheons at Community Church. Tristan is in town often. He's usually really, really busy, but maybe we could block out a couple hours to pick your brains some more and ask you more questions and give more opinions, Tristan. So on that note, Luis Guzman has prepared a beautiful lunch for those of us who are here. And again, Tristan, thanks so much. This is just rich and full. And I want to look at it again and again and share this presentation with a lot of our mutual friends, of which we have many, especially up in Maine and at the festival that you and I have both attended on Swans Island. So on that note, we say, brothers and sisters, our meeting is over. Brothers, we must part. Sisters, we'll be gone, but I will hold you in my heart. And we'll land on the shore, and we'll land on the shore, and we'll land on the shore and be safe forevermore. Tristan, thank you so much.